Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I know that it looks a little weird in here today. There's like an entire case of books that are missing. I am moving all of these milk crate bookcases up to my living room, and I am putting in the brand new 5 or 6 tier, I think they might be 6 tier, bookcases tomorrow. So I'm clearing out my studio. I'm doing a whole DIY project on the bookcases, really redoing my studio. I will eventually be doing a studio tour for y'all with all of my horror books and a lot of my DIY projects from the pandemic. For those of you guys who don't know, I did spend most of my pandemic not being able to work because I was a bartender and all of the bars were closed in New York. So I just moved in with my now fiance, then boyfriend, and pretty much wanted to create as much of my own space as possible. I'd always had apartments where I shared with roommates. This was the first time I was able to really just create stuff for the apartment that fit my personal kind of creepy goth aesthetic, and I tracked all of it on TikTok for about 1.5 years. Since I'm redoing my studio, and I've had a couple people ask for like studio tours and stuff like that before, I figured it'd be really fun to revive my TikTok, which is now at Prynne. It used to be a different name, but I have connected it to my booktubing. So I think I'm gonna just do whole like vlogging on TikTok of all of my library studio DIYs. And then once that is all done, I will give everybody a tour. So that is why this looks absolutely ridiculous right now. And it's so tiny and you can't see this, but there are just books all around me, just stacks and stacks and stacks of books. Like there's no floor at the moment. Just because I've been taking all of them down and just rearranging everything. So it is crazy in here. But I'm now done with my rambling. Let's get into the real reason why we are here, and that is for my March wrap up. Wrong, it is currently March, so this is my February wrap up. I made it through 5 books this month. 3 of them I do have reviews on my channel for. I will go through which books those are as I'm talking about them. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I haven't really posted too much, well, at all really this month. And I don't think I'm going to be doing wrap-ups on my Instagram anymore. I think I'm going to keep them exclusively here, and then just put like my aesthetic reviews, like micro reviews on Instagram, so I can always like have a small review for books that I read, even if I don't do full length videos on them. I think that's what I'm going to do. Instagram is the hardest part for me to keep up with, just because I'm not a photographer, and so to make like the photos like aesthetically pleasing takes a lot of time and energy and effort, and I feel like it shouldn't, but it does. So that's definitely my least favorite part about like book reviewing, but I do like using Instagram. I love the Bookstagram community. It's one of my favorites. So just if you follow me on Instagram and you're kind of like, what's going on here? That's all that's going on. Anyhow, let's dive in. So I was able to make it through 5 books this month. I was so close to making it through 6. I got through half of one. I'm reading Apt Pupil by Stephen King, and it is so disturbing that I keep reading it and then having to put it down, and reading it and then having to put it down. I was really hoping I could like crush it, but I can't. I can get like 50 pages in and then I read a scene and I'm just like, I do not feel good in this world. So sorry, I only made it through 5. But let's talk about them and what they were and how I liked almost all of them. Like I was thoroughly impressed with most of the books that I read this month. And oddly, every book this month, except for one, is a 4-star read. So no 5 stars. I did have one 3-star, but we'll get to that. So first up, let's talk about Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. Again, I have a whole review on this book, so I'm not going to go too in-depth for it. I liked this a hell of a lot more than Cackle. I thought it was a lot more realistic. I loved the concept of werewolves and the way that werewolves were utilized to create commentary on pregnancy. This is a really interesting book. Let me read the inside flap really quickly. Rory Morris isn't thrilled to be moving back to her hometown, even if it's only temporary. There are bad memories there, but her twin sister Scarlett is pregnant, estranged from the baby's father, and needs support. So Rory returns to the place she thought she'd put in her rear view. After a night out at a bar where she runs into Ian, an old almost flame, she hits a large animal with her car, and when she gets out to investigate, she's attacked. Rory survives miraculously, but life begins to look and feel different. She's unnaturally strong, with an aversion to silver, and suddenly the moon has her in its thrall. She's changing into someone else, something else, maybe even a monster. But does that mean she's putting those close to her in danger, or is embracing the wildness inside her the key to acceptance? So this was really interesting. I think some people have told me that it's like a romance in the past. The romance in this is like kind of lackluster. I really don't care about it. But I really loved the metaphors Rachel Harrison used with lycanthropy. I've never seen anything like it before, and it's very relatable and it's very tangible, and I really liked the feminist spin on this. That being said, like many of Rachel Harrison's characters in Cackle, I didn't really like any of the characters in this. They were not great people, they were not likable people, and I feel like, and I said this in my review, but I feel like Rachel Harrison's definition of feminism is very, 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 very different than mine. She loves this like boss lady, this empowered woman who is very, very cutthroat and will do anything to kind of push herself forward regardless of how it affects others, and especially with characters like Scarlett. I felt that was very much in this novel the way that it was in Cackle with the character Sophie, and even Annie to an extent. So while I did really enjoy this, I really loved the concept of werewolves and the feminist metaphor that was created from that. Again, it was definitely a little off for me just because of Rachel Harrison's own character redemptions, I want to say. I don't think there were any, and there should have been. There's really only two dynamic characters in the entire novel, Rory and Scarlett. Everybody else is very one note, and they're just to move the plot forward. That being said, Rachel Harrison writes in such an easy, free, millennial style that I just always want to read her books. Like, I can devour a Rachel Harrison novel because they're so easy to read, and they're so fast-paced, and they're so action-packed, even though they're set in small towns and very little is actually happening. So 4-star read, really did enjoy that book. Again, it had its issues, but it was way better than Cackle in my personal opinion. And I know she has a new book coming out, I believe, this year, so stoked for that as well. All right, next up, Gothic by Philip Fracassi. I also have a full review on this. I did this as a buddy read with my friend Blackacre Doe. This is my second Fracassi novel. And while I didn't like it as much as A Child Alone with Strangers, I still thought it was really, really cool. This is one of those books that's so meta. It's very, very, very self-aware of what it's saying and how it's portraying certain characteristics through literature while making commentary on literature. It's very interesting. Like I said in my review, it reminds me a lot of Kill Creek, but much darker and much heavier. This is the story of a Stephen King-like author who is now nearing 60, and he has passed his heyday of writing and has now kind of got writer's block and is writing what he believes is what he wants, but what mass marketing publishers do not believe will relate to an audience. To get him out of his writer's block, his girlfriend of 10 years buys him a desk that turns out to be like extremely, extremely evil, but makes him, again, a best-selling author. That is the premise for this. It was very dark, very disturbing. Definitely needs some trigger warnings for like assault and abuse, like suicide, like really not the prettiest novel in the world. It's got some really, really gnarly things in it. But once I understood what Fracassi was doing, I found the things that kind of disturbed me and annoyed me in the book to be more forgivable because they were making a commentary on the history of horror literature as we know it today. Especially comparing horror literature from the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s to what we see in today's modern contemporary writers. So yeah, this definitely didn't turn me off for Fracassi. It was a 4-star read, but it did have a lot of serious issues, so it was a very, very low 4-star read. But I do really appreciate what Fracassi was doing with this. I think he's an author that we really need to be on the lookout for because he's got Boys in the Valley coming out in a couple months, and I think that's going to be so cool if it's anything like this and A Child Alone with Strangers. He takes kind of basic concepts, flips them on their head, and takes you in a direction you didn't think you were going to go. I really like that. Again, Fracassi's writing is really, really easy to read. It's very colloquial, and I have a lot of fun with his books, even if they are, you know, very deeply disturbing at times. After Gothic, I needed a palette cleanser, so I picked up Iconic, The Masters of Italian Fashion by Megan Haas. This is just a little brief history and illustration companion of the history of Italian fashion designers, and especially like the 10 giants that we have. So you have Armani, Dolce and Gabbana, Prada, Gucci, Versace, Valentino, etc., etc. I love fashion. I love fashion history. So every now and then I read a really dark book and I need a palette cleanser to kind of pull me out of what I've been reading, and they're usually about the fashion world. So I picked up that. That was a 4-star read for me. Don't really need to talk too much about that because this is a horror channel, but that was a book I read. All right, next up. do have a whole full-length review on this. It's one of my most anticipated reads for like the last year and a half, 2 years. And that is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I'm not going to read the inside flap of this book because I don't think it tells you anything about this book. I really thought this book was going to be about like the real estate market and trying to like exorcise ghosts from a house and like putting it on the market and dealing with like appraisers and contractors and all the stuff that you would do to actually, you know, sell a house. It's not about that at all. This is a book about haunted puppets, possessed puppets. It's very creepy, it's very whimsical, it's very fun. I liked it a hell of a lot more than Final Girl Support Group. I liked it more than We Sold Our Souls. I liked it more than Horror Store. Definitely nowhere near as great as My Best Friend's Exorcism or Southern Book Club's Guide to Slay Vampires, but gives me hope in Hendrix because I was really upset with Final Girl Support Group. Similar to Shut Sharp Teeth, there isn't a single likable character in this book really, or at least the dynamic characters. It takes place again in the South. It takes place in Charleston, South Carolina, as many of Grady Hendrix's books do, and is primarily about the relationship between a brother and sister who are both in their late 30s, and kind of the dispute over the will of their parents to see who will get said haunted house. Again, very, very dislikable characters, but one of the things that I thought was great about this novel was not only the depiction of the possessed puppets. I thought they were really cool and really creepy, but our character Mark's whole backstory sequence, and again, I spoke very in depth about this in the review, did two things that I thought were really interesting. It made a character that I found very dislikable really intriguing and somewhat likable, and it also gave Grady Hendrix the ability to play with a male lead. I feel like in almost all of his novels we focus primarily on strong female leads, and this one we have a very complex, very complicated male lead, and I thought he was executed very, very well, and he made the book more well-rounded, I would say. There's definitely a lot of fluff in this book that could have been trimmed. There's an entire storyline with a character named Poppy that I feel like went on for way too long and was way overdone, and if it had been like truncated maybe 50 pages and maybe pulled that character out of it, the book would have been much more concise and much more manageable, because it did take me a little bit longer to get through than I expected. Usually I can read a Grady Hendrix book in like 3 or 4 days, but this one took definitely a little bit longer, and I felt like all the Poppy chapters really kind of just bored me to tears. The Waffle House scene is great. I loved the Waffle House scene. So yeah, 4 stars, stoked on that. If you want to hear my full thoughts on this book, I highly recommend checking out my video review on How to Sell a Haunted House. I really, really, really talk about the issues that I had with it in comparison to just Grady Hendrix being a writer I really like and respect overall. Okay, and last but not least, this came in my most recent Twisted Retreat box. I was really, really excited for this. I loved the concept. I loved the cover. This book is beautiful. Like, it's so stunning. And now that I've read the actual book, like, the illustrations and the cover just make so much more sense. Unfortunately, though, this was my one 3-star read. So I'm going to read the inside flap for y'all real quick. One stormy Christmas, Scarlett recalls the ebb and flow of a year-long love affair with Henry, a renowned taxidermist. Obsessed with his taxidermy creatures, she pushes him to outdo his colleague and world-famous rival in a crescendo of species-blending creativity. Scarlett will not be able to avoid a reckoning with her own past, as Henry's inventions creep into her own thoughts, dreams, and desires. Drenched in the torrential rains of the Somerset moorland and the sensual pleasures of the characters, the taxidermist lovers lures you deeper into Scarlett's delightfully eerie world. It's a very sexually charged novel, which I was not expecting. But what's even more interesting to me is how gothic in tone the story is. I feel like the tone of the author really, really aimed to be like a late 1800s kind of gothic atmospheric story with a very unreliable narrator kind of going back and forth between past and present with her relationship with this really bizarre, super wealthy taxidermist. And I found the writing to be what made this book a 3-star read, because the story is really freaking cool. It's really creepy. It's really unnerving. It's not scary. Like, I wouldn't consider this necessarily a horror novel until the very end, where you get this one visual that is just like overwhelmingly grotesque. And it's very anxiety inducing, but the way the main character spoke, it's all first person, was so dated and flowery and just overly descriptive. And it really took me out of the novel, because I would have this really like over the top beautiful prose, and then I would have characters who would come in, like her brother or her husband, and just speak very just speak like a very standard like 2022 person, and they would talk about their cell phones, they would curse, they would use slang. Like all of a sudden, like when you're talking about like the internet and like Facebook, and you have this like 1800s gothic narration, it's really jarring. And I really wish that Polly Hall had kind of toned down the flowery language and made it a little more contemporary in feeling, because I feel like the book would have been way easier to get through. While I don't mind the style, because it did kind of put you in like this haze of not quite understanding what was going on, especially having an unreliable narrator as well, you can very clearly tell is keeping certain secrets, and like has her own paranoia. Like it was very jarring and cool to read, but it was also very tedious to read. So it was only like 220 pages, and it took me like a week to get through because of the way the prose and the language was. And it didn't feel as eloquent or as elevated as, say, something like Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca or Jane Eyre. It just felt forced, and it was extremely noticeable anytime something super contemporary and modern came in, again, like technology or slang. So that was interesting. This book does need a lot of trigger warnings. Never got to say this. I was told there was animal cruelty in How to Sell a Haunted House, and I talked about it in a video when I opened it with my Nightworms package. There really isn't. So somebody must have been mixing up the books. There is like a couple bizarre scenes with squirrels, so maybe that was what they were talking about, but nothing that I couldn't handle in that. The other thing that I thought was interesting about The Taxidermist Lover is I'm really interested in taxidermy. I think it's really cool. I've never really had an opinion on alternative taxidermy, where you're like slicing different animals together. After reading this book, it makes me think that it's really, really wrong. And I really do wonder how much Polly Hall is related to the taxidermy world, because the way she wrote about it was really beautiful and respectful, and I really, really loved that. I liked the twist. I thought the ending was awesome. The ending of this novel was so grotesque and bizarre, and like it wasn't necessarily unpredictable. Like I feel like it could only go in this direction, and it was hinting at it the whole time, but it was just creepy. Like if this was an actual movie, like A24 could make this into a really, really good, creepy, unsettling, disturbing movie, sort of in the realm of Saint Maud, if you guys have seen that. So definitely a 3-star read just because of the language. I really liked the story. I thought the characters were really, really creepy, really interesting. Nobody was quite good. It's this really dysfunctional relationship between our main character, her husband, and her twin brother, and it's just very, very strange. But again, lots of trigger warnings definitely in that novel as well. Anyhow, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays, and if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah.